Have you ever wondered, behind the glittering spotlights and the songs loved by millions, are there untold stories? In the music world, where image is meticulously crafted, some artists have to live between two worlds, one for the public and a private world kept secret behind the scenes. For fame, for public pressure, or simply the fear of losing everything. Many famous musicians and singers have hidden their same-sex relationships for years, even their entire lives. In today's video, we'll explore these surprising stories, secret relationships, hidden truths, and why they couldn't be true to themselves. Are you ready? Because some names on this list might surprise you. Before we begin, if you enjoy mysterious behind-the-scenes stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Boy George has long been considered a rebellious icon of the 1980s. With his bold, gender-neutral style, distinctive and unmistakable voice, and hits associated with Culture Club. But behind that dazzling spotlight lies a long-hidden love story. Few know that, at the height of his career, Boy George had a deep relationship with the band's drummer, John Moss. Remarkably, in the context of the time, this relationship was almost impossible to make public. Affected by the pressures of the music industry, the social prejudices of the 1980s, and the image-building conventions of the era, this love story had to remain in silence. Even when genuine emotions permeated their music, the public remained unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. Only years later, as details gradually emerged, did people begin to realize that behind the songs that made Culture Club famous, there might have been very real, very personal emotions that couldn't have been expressed at the right time. A long-hidden relationship, or the silent inspiration that created a memorable period of 1980s music. Andy Bell is one of the few artists who chose a very different path from the very beginning of his career. While many artists of his time had to hide their true selves, he entered the spotlight with erasure with rare frankness. From the 1980s, a period when coming out as gay was still a sensitive issue and could directly impact one's career, Andy Bell did not choose silence. He didn't hide, nor did he build a different image to please the masses. From the very beginning, Andy Bell lived true to himself, a bold choice in the social context of the time. It is this sincerity that gives his story a very unique character. That doesn't mean the road ahead was any easier. Behind the glitz and glamour of the stage were still pressures, prejudiced stares, and anxieties about whether audiences would truly accept him for who he really was. However, Andy Bell remained steadfast in his choice. With Erasure, he created a series of outstanding hits, proving that music can overcome all barriers and that honesty is sometimes the strongest thing. And perhaps, what makes his story memorable isn't his difference, but the fact that he chose to live authentically in an era where it wasn't easy to do so. Pete Townshend has long been known as a rock legend, the man behind the Who's classic hits. However, beyond the image of an artist associated with fame, career, and the stable standards in the public eye, his life still holds aspects that have surprised many. In some of his shared experiences, Pete Townshend has spoken about his personal experiences and curiosity related to both genders. These aren't publicly shared stories, but rather very private perspectives, difficult to express, especially in a society that was once heavily prejudiced against sexual orientation. These revelations have sparked considerable debate. Were they a self-discovery during a certain period, or a part of his true self that had been kept hidden for years due to social pressure? Despite differing perspectives, Pete Townshend's story makes one thing clear. Even the greatest icons of rock carry within them private lives that the public can only fully understand long after a long time has passed. Michael Stipe has long been considered one of REM's most enigmatic vocalists, not only in his music, but also in his personal life. For many years during the peak of his career, Michael Stipe almost never gave a clear answer about his sexual orientation. Interviews were often vague, with open-ended answers, just enough to pique the audience's curiosity, but never leading to a definitive statement. This silence and evasiveness led to much speculation surrounding him. Was this something he was trying to hide, or simply a way to maintain some privacy amidst the overwhelming spotlight of fame? It wasn't until many years later, after he had moved beyond his peak, that Michael Stipe began to open up more about himself, sharing that he had had relationships with both men and women in the past. It's not a shocking story or a sudden exposure, but rather a very natural, slow-paced process where an artist chooses the right moment to reveal their own truth. And perhaps it is precisely this prolonged silence over many years that makes Michael Stipe's story so special and captivating in its own unique way. In a music world full of unconventional icons, Klaus Nomi is perhaps one of the strangest and most unforgettable names. With his surreal style, distinctive anti-tenor voice, and stage presence that almost defied conventional norms, he not only made a strong impression, but also left audiences both astonished and bewildered. But behind that eccentric exterior lay a life full of untold stories. At a time when the LGBTQ+ community still faced many social prejudices, Klaus Nomi lived quite privately. However, those around him and the art world understood that he belonged to this community, even though he never made it a public declaration in the modern way we often see today. Not sensational or noisy stories, but a quiet existence where personal life and art almost blend together, yet retaining private spaces that the public cannot fully see. Klaus Nomi's life becomes even more haunting as he was one of the first known artists to die from AIDS in the early 1980s, a period when the disease was still heavily misunderstood and associated with intense stigma. And perhaps that is why his image is not just that of an artist with a distinctive style, but also a symbol of an era where so many stories, so many people were never fully told. Mark Almond is always remembered for his emotionally rich voice and the dark, haunting hits of Soft Cell. But behind those haunting melodies lies a complex inner life with more layers of meaning than audiences often perceive. Throughout his career, Mark Almond never confined himself to a fixed mold. While he didn't always explicitly talk about his personal life, his experiences, emotions, and relationships, especially with men, were clearly present in his music. Not through sensational or overtly revealed stories, but through his lyrics, his expression, and the image he cultivated over time. In a society once plagued by prejudice, expressing unconventional emotions sometimes meant keeping a part of his true self to himself, not easily shared with the public. And that's what makes Mark Almond's music special. It's not just about the melodies to listen to, but also about how he conveys things that aren't always easy to say in everyday life. Before coming out publicly became commonplace in the lives of artists, there was one name that dared to step into the spotlight very early on: Joe Briath. In the 1970s, when the music industry was still fraught with barriers and prejudice, Joe Briath was introduced as the first openly gay rock star. It was a bold, even shocking, image at the time. But behind that glamorous publicity strategy lay a much more complex story. Coming out didn't bring the acceptance he hoped for. Instead of being celebrated, Joe Briath faced public backlash, media pressure, and an industry still unprepared for change. It wasn't the relationships hidden in the shadows that became the greatest pressure he faced, but rather the very act of not hiding them that became his greatest burden. His career quickly stalled and then faded away, despite his undeniable talent and artistic personality. And then, like many other artists who have appeared in similar stories, Joe Briath's life ended quietly when he died of AIDS in 1983. An artist who was ahead of his time, but was not appreciated by his own era as he deserved. Elton John's journey wasn't simply about finding himself. It was more like a prolonged struggle between the glamour of the stage and the unspoken truths. Before becoming a music legend, he believed he could live up to external expectations. Elton was engaged to Linda Woodrow, a relationship that seemed destined for a stable life, but ultimately ended just before marriage. Later, that decision to leave became the inspiration for "Someone Saved My Life Tonight," a way of freeing himself from a path that wasn't truly his own. As his career took off, he entered into same-sex relationships discreetly, including with John Reed, who was both his lover and manager. But in the context of that era, feelings and truth couldn't always be openly expressed. Then, at another stage, Elton chose a path that surprised many, marrying Renata Blauel. But even while living within a standard image, according to societal expectations, he still struggled silently with his true self. Only later, when he could no longer hide, did he admit that he had spent too much time denying his true self. And from that point, a different Elton John emerged, no longer playing a role, no longer hiding from himself. What gives his story its weight isn't the attention-grabbing plot twists, but the fact that a person must navigate through many layers of disguise, only to finally live authentically. And perhaps the biggest question isn't, why did it take so long? But rather, what would have happened if he could have lived authentically from the very beginning? Freddie Mercury was one of those artists whose true character, behind the stage lights, took the world a long time to fully understand. On stage, he was a true storm, powerful, confident, and seemingly unconstrained by any boundaries. Each of Freddie's performances became an explosive moment, where tens of thousands of fans joined in an energy that is difficult to replicate. But when the lights went out, Freddie entered a different world, quieter, more private, where fame could no longer mask the inner turmoil. For many years, his love life was kept secret in a society still steeped in prejudice. Freddie had deep relationships with both men and women, but rarely publicly acknowledged or explained them. Not because of a lack of sincerity, but because the times were not yet ready to accept that truth. The paradox is that the more of a global icon Freddie Mercury became, the more he had to live between layers of self, between his true self, his stage persona, and something else that was difficult to define. Even when facing illness and declining health, he continued to dedicate himself to music until his final days, as if the stage were the only place where he could be truly himself. And perhaps, Freddie Mercury was not just a legend of rock, but also a symbol of living authentically in a world that was once unprepared to accept differences. If there was one artist who truly broke all gender and image boundaries in music, it was Sylvester, often called the Queen of Disco. During the glorious disco era of the 1970s, when many artists were still reserved in their self-expression, Sylvester emerged as a completely different force. Flamboyant costumes, a bold, gender-neutral style, and a distinctive, unmistakable falsetto voice. He didn't hide his true self. However, that didn't mean an entirely easy life. Behind the spotlight, Sylvester still lived in a context where being himself sometimes meant facing prejudice, misunderstanding, and even unnameable loneliness. His relationships and personal feelings weren't always perceived as they truly were, even though he never tried to deny who he was. Sylvester's music, especially his classic disco hits, was not merely for dancing or entertainment, but also carried a spirit of freedom, individuality, and an affirmation of the right to live authentically in an era of many limitations. And when he died of AIDS in 1988, the world gradually looked back and realized they had lost not only an extraordinary voice, but also one of the pioneering icons of freedom and individuality. Luther Vandross is known as one of the greatest R&B vocalists of all time, a man who created sweet, deep, and emotional love songs that touched the hearts of millions. However, behind those sentimental melodies, the public has always carried a question that has lingered for years. Who did the artist behind those love songs truly love? Unlike many artists of his time, Luther Vandross almost never publicly revealed his private life. There were no clearly confirmed relationships, no specific statements, just a silence that lasted for decades. This secrecy led to much speculation. Some believe he had private relationships with men, but never made them public, perhaps due to pressure from the industry, his image as an artist, or simply a choice to keep his personal life to himself? What makes his story so special is that, though unspoken, the emotions in Luther Vandross's music are so genuine that it's hard to doubt, as if everything that had never been revealed had been embedded in each melody. And perhaps it is this prolonged silence that becomes the greatest mystery in Luther Vandross's life. Johnny Mathis once shared, "I believe we can be more sensitive to the needs of our fellow human beings, that we can become better neighbors to one another." Yet, few could have predicted that a single statement would plunge his career into a whirlwind of intense controversy. In 1982, in an interview, Mathis quite frankly stated that homosexuality is a way of life I'm familiar with. But when this statement was made public, the reaction was immediate. Waves of criticism, pressure, and even threats followed, forcing him to remain silent for a very long time afterward. For many years, Mathis avoided discussing the topic, almost completely separating his personal life from his artistic image. It wasn't until 2017 that he began to speak more openly about his experience, sharing, "I'm from San Francisco, but even there, being true to my sexual orientation wasn't easy." His journey, from an unintentional confession that escalated into controversy to gradually opening up to himself, reflects the pressures faced by many LGBTQ+ artists of his time. And looking back, one can't help but wonder, how many artists have had to live in silence to maintain their careers? How many talented singers have never had the chance to live authentically? If there was one artist who was once considered the fifth member of the Beatles, it was Billy Preston, a rare keyboard talent who played with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and many other legends of music history. He performed on the world's biggest stages, where bright lights shone and iconic musical moments were created, but his life behind the scenes was far from glamorous. In an era of strong prejudice, Preston kept his personal life private, and some close associates later revealed he had relationships with men, something he never publicly acknowledged during his lifetime. Alongside the glamour were silent battles, the pressures of his career, struggles with addiction, and the lasting traumas that the public rarely saw behind the scenes. The paradox lies in the fact that the artist who contributed to significant milestones in music history has repeatedly had to retreat into the shadows of his own life. And the question remains, if Billy Preston could have lived more openly and fully with himself, would his life and career have been so brilliant in a different way? If there's one thing the public has never fully grasped about Janis Joplin, it's not just her powerful, emotional voice, but also the intimate relationships she had behind the scenes. Janis is often remembered as a free-spirited rock icon, a woman who lived life to the fullest with intense relationships with men, and a personality that refused to accept boundaries. However, few know that in her private life, she also had feelings for women, in a very natural and deeply personal way. In 1963, amidst the liberal yet still somewhat restrictive atmosphere of San Francisco, Janis had a relationship with Jay Whittaker, an African-American woman. But in the social context of the time, that relationship quickly faced pressure and limitations stemming from surrounding prejudices. Later, she developed a deep relationship with Peggy Caserta, a fashion boutique owner. This relationship wasn't simply a romantic one, but a complex whirlwind of emotions, passionate, unstable, and difficult to break free from, despite the deep wounds it inflicted. On stage, Janis Joplin embodied a raging fire, powerful, wild, and uncontrollable. But when the lights went out, she retreated to prolonged moments of solitude, an emptiness that even fame couldn't fill. Her famous quote still haunts many. "I've had sex with 25,000 people, but I still have to go home alone." And in the end, the question remains, if Janis Joplin had lived in a more open era, would her life and music have taken on a different, gentler tone? While Dusty Springfield's singing voice touched the hearts of millions, her private life unfolded in a prolonged silence. a place where true emotions were kept hidden from the critical scrutiny of the era. In 1970, in a rare moment of candidness, Dusty said, "I know I can be attracted to both a girl and a boy." A bold statement at a time when differences were still considered unacceptable. Nevertheless, she chose to keep much of her personal life away from the public eye. Relationships with women, such as Faye Harris or actress Tada Brack, were only mentioned in discreet, low-profile stories, without public confirmation, and almost never became media attention. Behind the glamour of a pop icon, Dusty Springfield also endured challenging times, prolonged loneliness, periods of depression, and substance abuse, pains that may have been compounded by the suppression of her true self. Yet, amidst it all, her music endures. From Son of a Preacher Man to other timeless love songs, Dusty sang more than just love. She conveyed it through her own life experiences, though not always authentically. Therefore, Dusty Springfield's legacy lies not only in her legendary voice, but also in the unspoken truths of her life. Little Richard's story is not just part of music history. It also carries the color of a pioneering tragedy, where talent, identity, and belief constantly clash within one person. With songs like Tutti Frutti, he not only created a new performance style, but also helped shape the rock and roll era. Yet, behind the explosive energy on stage lay a deeply conflicted inner life, where he constantly navigated between the spotlight and contradictions that are difficult to define. In 1995, Little Richard frankly admitted, "I have been gay my whole life." A moment that seemed liberating, but failed to close the door on his inner conflicts. Because later, under the influence of his religious faith, he made statements that contradicted his own words, considering them unnatural. This transformation made his image more complex, as if he himself were engaging in a dialogue with himself through different stages. He once shared his feeling of being marginalized, too different to conform to the norm, too rebellious to be fully accepted, and too human to detach himself from himself. Despite being considered one of the founders of rock and roll, Little Richard still carries an unanswered question. Was he fully recognized for his musical legacy, or did his personal identity make that journey heavier than necessary? And to this day, that question remains open, without a truly complete conclusion. If there was one artist who transformed change into a living art, it was David Bowie, who not only revolutionized music, but also changed the world's understanding of identity. From Ziggy Stardust to his later experimental phases, Bowie always appeared as a figure from the future, ready to break down all stereotypes about gender, image, and even the traditional definition of artist. Behind those innovative stage characters, his personal life also always attracted attention. Bowie had relationships with both men and women, and at various times, he openly admitted to being attracted to many different genders, though his self-perception changed over time and with life experiences. Remarkably, Bowie never turned this into a sensational or controversial story. He allowed it to exist naturally as a part of himself, flexible, dynamic, and not confined to any fixed mold. It was this freedom that contributed to his timeless works, where music was not just sound, but a space for people to experiment and become whatever version of themselves they desired. David Bowie was not simply a rock star. He was proof that identity is not a fixed concept, but a journey of constant movement and self-redefinition. After all the spotlight, fame, and untold stories, what remains is not a secret, but the real people behind the music. If you find these behind-the-scenes stories interesting, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. And don't forget to leave a comment. Which artist impressed you the most? I'd love to read your opinion.